I am Russell, and for as long as I can remember, my name has been a synonym for disappointment in my father's house. It wasn't something he ever said outright, not in so many words. It was in the sighs when I walked into a room, the way his eyes would scan over me and find some immediate flaw, my shirt untucked, my hair a little too long, the grease under my fingernails from a car I was actually proud of fixing. My father, you see, is Sheriff Miller. In our small town of Havenwood, that name means something. It means order, respect, strength. He's the kind of man who stands ramrod straight in his uniform, whose voice can cut through the noise of a town fair, whose handshake is a contract. And I was his slouched, soft-spoken, perpetually off-the-mark son, his problem. So when Miller's General, the one-stop shop for everything from fishing lures to flour, was robbed last Tuesday, I can't say I was surprised when the evidence started pointing my way. It was almost poetic in its cruelty. A blurry security camera image of a man in a dark ski mask, a size 11 boot print left in the mud behind the store. The next morning, two of my father's deputies were at my door. They didn't look me in the eye. They found an old black ski mask, balled up in the back of my closet, a relic from my high school snowboarding days. They found my work boots, caked in fresh mud, size 11. It was all too neat, too perfect. Like a story written by someone who already knew the ending. They took me down to the station, the same station I'd been dragged to as a teenager for a handful of stupid mistakes, a busted taillight, a clandestine beer with friends down by the river. But this was different. The air was cold, sterile. The deputies who'd known me my whole life, who'd watched me grow up, suddenly looked at me like I was a stranger, a piece of filth they had to handle. My father made me wait for 3 hours in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and regret. Then he came for me himself. He didn't walk in as my dad, he walked in as the sheriff. He slid a folder onto the metal table between us. It wasn't thick, but it felt heavy, like it was filled with lead. "Russell," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "This is where we are." He opened it, a grainy photo of the masked figure. A lab report on the boot print. A statement from Old Man Miller, the store owner, saying a few $100s and some cartons of cigarettes were missing. It was all there, a clean, simple case. "This is insane, Dad." "You know I didn't do this," I said, my voice cracking. I hated that. I hated that he could still make me feel like a child. He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of granite. "What I know is that the evidence is compelling. What I know is that you've been struggling, fired from your last job, behind on your rent. A jury will see a motive, they'll see a pattern. A pattern." He was talking about my life. The business I tried to start that failed, the community college courses I dropped out of. Every misstep, every stumble, he wasn't just remembering them, he had cataloged them. He was using my failures, the very failures he'd so often magnified, as rungs on a ladder to my own conviction. "So what is this?" I asked, gesturing at the folder. "You come in here to tell me you're locking up your own son?" He closed the folder with a soft final thud. "I'm here to offer you a way out, my way out. The DA is willing to offer a plea. Robbery, 2nd degree. You plead guilty, you show remorse. With good behavior, you'll be out in a couple of years. A clean slate." My blood ran cold. A plea, for something I didn't do. "Listen to me," he hissed, leaning closer. The facade of the calm sheriff cracked, and for a second I saw the raw, angry man beneath. "You take the deal, or I will personally see to it that they get you for armed robbery. The charge is shaky, but I can make it stick. I'll talk to Miller, I'll find a witness who thought they saw a weapon. I'll build a case, son, and you will go away for a long, long time. 10 years, maybe 15. Your choice." It was an ultimatum delivered with the chilling finality of a death sentence. He was going to bury me. He was going to take his problem, son, his lifelong disappointment, and lock him away where he couldn't tarnish the family name anymore. He was solving the problem of Russell, once and for all, and as I sat there staring into the face of the man who was supposed to protect me, the man who was now my own personal executioner, a memory surfaced. It came up from the deep dark soil of my childhood, a secret I had buried for 20 years out of fear, and a desperate childish need for my father's love. He thinks he's burying his problem. What he's forgotten is that when I was 12 years old, on a hot moonless summer night, I saw him digging a hole under the ancient oak tree at the far edge of our property. I saw him wrestling a heavy, bulging canvas bag into the earth. It was the same night that Deputy Frank Peterson, his only real rival for the sheriff's position, disappeared off the face of the earth. Forever. My father thinks he's about to put me in the ground. He has no idea I'm about to dig up his ghost. The holding cell was a cage of concrete and silence. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing tune, a soundtrack for despair. For the first hour after he left, that's all there was. Despair. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered me, pressing the air from my lungs. My own father, he wasn't just letting this happen, he was orchestrating it. He had taken the scattered, messy pieces of my life and arranged them into a mosaic of guilt. The ski mask was probably from a box in the garage he'd told me to clear out months ago. The boots? I'd left them on the back porch. He had access to it all. He had the narrative, and now he had the props. I paced the tiny cell, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The concrete was cold under my thin socks. I thought about my life, not as a series of events, but as a long drawn-out audition for a role I was never going to get, the son of Sheriff Miller. Every memory was tinged with the bitter taste of his disapproval. It was a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my existence. I could feel it now, a vibration in my bones. My mind flashed back to when I was 17. I'd just gotten my license. I was so proud. He had a spare patrol car, an old Crown Vic he used for errands. One rainy afternoon, he asked me to pick up some documents from the county courthouse. It felt like a mission, a test. I was so focused on being perfect, on driving exactly the speed limit, on signaling a full 3 seconds before my turn, that I didn't see the patch of black ice on the bridge. The car spun, a slow, sickening ballet of metal and momentum, and kissed the guardrail. It wasn't a terrible crash. The fender was dented, the headlights smashed, but in my world, it was catastrophic. When he arrived at the scene, he didn't ask if I was okay. He walked past me, his face a thundercloud, and ran his hand over the crumpled fender. Of course he'd muttered, not to me, but to the universe. Of course, he didn't yell. Yelling would have been better. Instead, he treated me with a cold, surgical disappointment that was 1,000 times worse. For weeks, the mangled car sat in our driveway like a monument to my incompetence, a daily reminder that I couldn't even be trusted with a simple errand. He made sure everyone knew the story. It became part of the Russell, the screw-up mythology. Then there was the landscaping business. After dropping out of community college, I'd poured every dollar I had into a used truck and some professional-grade mowers. I was good at it. I liked working with my hands, transforming overgrown messes into something clean and orderly. For the first 6 months, I was actually turning a profit. I felt a flicker of pride, of independence. I even dared to think he might be impressed. One evening, I mentioned to him I was thinking of expanding, maybe hiring a guy to help me. He was sitting in his leather armchair, reading the paper. He didn't even lower it. "Russell, it's a fine hobby, but a business. You need a head for that. You need to understand numbers, people, risk. It's not just about pushing a lawnmower." He said it so calmly, with such paternal authority, that it didn't even sound like an insult. It sounded like a fact. And because he was my father, because he was Sheriff Miller, I believed him. My confidence, a fragile seedling, withered under the shadow of his doubt. 6 months later, after a couple of clients paid late and a key piece of equipment broke down, I folded. I didn't have the stomach for the risk he talked about. He had planted the fear of failure in me so deep that I made it a self-fulfilling prophecy. He never said, "I told you so." He didn't have to. The silence was louder. These memories churned in my gut, a toxic cocktail of shame and anger. He had spent my entire life cultivating this image of me as a well-meaning but fundamentally flawed person, a project that would never quite be finished. And now, he was cashing in on that image. He was using the character he had created to justify destroying my life. It was the ultimate betrayal. A father is supposed to build his son up. Mine had spent 20 years building my cage. And then, through the fog of my rage, the other memory came. The one I had pushed down so far it was almost fossilized. Summer. I was 12. The air in my bedroom was thick and hot, the kind of night where the cicadas buzz so loud it feels like the whole world is screaming. I couldn't sleep. I was at that awkward age, too old for a nightlight, but still young enough to be afraid of the dark. I was staring at the ceiling, watching the headlights of the occasional passing car slide across my walls when I heard a sound that didn't belong. The gravel in our long driveway, crunching under the tires of my father's truck. It was late, past 2 in the morning. He was supposed to be on a late shift, but this wasn't the sound of him coming home tired. This was slow, deliberate. I crept out of bed and went to my window, which overlooked the side yard and the vast, dark woods beyond. At the very edge of our property, where the manicured lawn gave way to wild undergrowth, stood a massive oak tree. It was ancient, its branches, like gnarled arms, reaching for the sky. We called it the Old Man. And there, in the faint glow of the truck's parking lights, was my father. He had a shovel. He was digging. He moved with a grim, frantic energy I had never seen before. He wasn't the calm, imposing sheriff. He was just a man, sweating in the humid night air, his back straining with effort. Dirt flew. After a few minutes he stopped, breathing heavily. He went to the bed of his truck and pulled out a long, heavy-looking bag made of thick, off-white canvas. It was lumpy, misshapen. He dragged it to the hole. It took all his strength to roll it in. It landed with a soft, sickening thud that I felt more than heard. Then he filled the hole. He worked methodically, packing the earth down with the back of the shovel, then scattering leaves and twigs over the spot to make it look undisturbed. When he was done, he stood there for a long moment, his shoulders slumped, staring at the ground. He looked haunted. He looked like a man who had just buried a part of his own soul. I scrambled back into bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled the covers up to my chin and squeezed my eyes shut, pretending I was asleep, pretending I had seen nothing. I didn't understand what I had witnessed, not completely, but a primal, childlike fear told me it was something terrible, something I should never ever speak of. The next day, the news spread through Havenwood like a virus. Deputy Frank Peterson was missing. His car was found abandoned by the side of the highway leading out of town. The official theory was that he'd just walked away. He and his wife were having problems, people whispered. Maybe he had a gambling debt. My father, Sheriff Miller, led the search with a stoic and heavy heart. He was a pillar of strength for the community and for Peterson's devastated wife and young daughter. I remember watching my father on the local news, his face etched with concern. He spoke about Frank as a good man, a dedicated officer, and a dear friend. He promised he would leave no stone unturned, and I knew he was lying because I had seen him turning the earth himself under the Old Man Oak. The town soon learned that Deputy Peterson had been planning to run against my father for sheriff in the upcoming election. Peterson was younger, more charismatic. He talked about community policing, about building trust, not fear. People liked him. He was a genuine threat. With him gone, my father ran unopposed. He had been sheriff ever since. For 20 years that memory was my secret burden. It was a dark, terrifying knowledge that I kept locked away. Fear kept me silent. And I'm ashamed to admit, a sliver of desperate hope that if I was a good son, if I just kept my mouth shut, maybe one day my father would finally see me, would finally approve of me. That hope was a poison I'd been drinking my whole life. Now, sitting in that cold cell, the poison was finally purged. The ultimatum wasn't an attack, it was a gift. It was the final, absolute confirmation that my father's love was not something I could ever earn, because it didn't exist. He wasn't my protector, he was my enemy, and the only thing an enemy understands is leverage. The despair in my chest didn't vanish, but it began to change. It cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a single pointed thought. He had forgotten about the Old Man Oak. He had forgotten what I saw. In his arrogance, in his complete and utter dismissal of me as a person of consequence, he had made a fatal error. He'd spent 2 decades making sure I felt powerless. He was about to find out what a powerless man does when he's finally pushed too far. The humming of the fluorescent lights no longer sounded like a dirge. It sounded like a battle cry. My resolve solidified. It wasn't about revenge for Frank Peterson, not yet. It was simpler than that. It was about survival. He had thrown me in a hole and was shoveling dirt on top of me. It was time for me to start digging my way out. I walked to the cell door and banged on it once. "I'm ready to make my phone call," I said to the guard. He wasn't going to get a confession. He was going to get a war. The one phone call. It's a cliché, a trope from 1,000 cop shows. But when you're actually sitting there, with the greasy receiver pressed to your ear and the coiled cord stretched tight, it feels like the most important call of your life. My father expected me to call a bail bondsman or a public defender. He expected me to be scared and desperate. He wasn't entirely wrong about the scared part, but he was dead wrong about who I'd call. I dialed the number from memory. It rang 3 times. Dolan's Excavation and Landscaping, Ben speaking. "Ben, it's me. It's Russell." There was a pause. "Russ, where are you? Your phone's going straight to voicemail. I was about to call your dad." "Don't," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "Don't call him." "Ben, I'm in trouble. I'm at the station." "The station? What for? Did you get another ticket in that rust bucket you call a truck?" His voice was light, trying to joke, but I could hear the undercurrent of concern. Ben Dolan and I had been friends since kindergarten. We'd built forts together, gotten into trouble together, and stood by each other when our lives went in different directions. His towards a successful, respectable business, mine towards, well, this. He was the only person in Havenwood who didn't look at me and see my father's disappointment. He just saw, "Russell, it's not a ticket, man. They're saying I robbed the general store." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "You're kidding me," he finally said, all trace of humor gone. "That's insane. You wouldn't steal a pack of gum." "Tell that to my father," I said, my voice low. "He's the one pinning it on me. He's got evidence, Ben. Planted evidence. He gave me an ultimatum: plead guilty, or he'll make sure I do a decade in prison." I heard him exhale, a long, frustrated sound. "That son of a..." I always knew he was a piece of work, Russ, but this is a whole new level. "What do you need? A lawyer? Bail money?" "I need my bail posted." "Yeah, I've got most of it in my savings. I'll transfer it to you, but I need something else. Something more important." I took a deep breath. "I need a shovel, and I need you to help me dig." "Dig? Dig for what? Russ, what are you talking about?" "The old oak tree," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "On my dad's property. The big one at the edge of the woods." Ben was silent for a long moment. He was there that summer. We were 12. He knew about Deputy Peterson disappearing. The whole town knew. "The old man oak?" he asked, his voice now hushed. Connecting dots. I hadn't even given him yet. "Russell, what's under that tree?" "His rival," I said. "The one who was going to run against him for sheriff." The phone line crackled with unspoken horror. Ben didn't question me. He didn't call me crazy. That's the thing about a true friend. They know the sound of the truth in your voice, even when the truth is unbelievable. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "All business." "Okay, Russell. I'll be there in an hour to post your bail. We'll figure this out. Don't say another word to anyone. You hear me? Not a word." Walking out of that station was surreal. The sun was brighter, the air sharper. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 20 years and had finally exhaled. Ben was waiting for me in his work truck. He didn't say much, just clapped me on the shoulder and handed me a bottle of water. We drove to my apartment in silence. Once inside, the planning began. It couldn't be as simple as marching onto his property with shovels. My father was the sheriff. The property was his fortress. If we were caught, he could shoot us and claim we were intruders, or at the very least, arrest us for trespassing and evidence tampering. My word against his. My secret against his badge. It was a battle we'd lose before it began. "We can't just go digging," Ben said, pacing my small living room. "He'll have us in cuffs before the shovel hits the dirt. We need a plan. We need to be smarter than him. We need to turn his own system against him," I said, the idea forming in my mind. "He uses the law as a weapon. We have to do the same." That's when I thought of her. Sarah Peterson, Frank Peterson's daughter. She'd been just a kid, maybe 8 or 9, when he vanished. I remembered her as a quiet girl with big sad eyes. After high school, she'd left Havenwood and never looked back. I'd heard she became a journalist, working for a major newspaper in the state capital. She had never accepted the official story. She had spent years quietly asking questions, convinced her father was a victim of foul play, not a man who would abandon his family. She was the key. I need to find Sarah Peterson, I told Ben. It took Ben less than an hour of searching online to find her work email. She was an investigative reporter. Perfect. I wrote the email of my life, careful with every word. I didn't say who I was. I just said I was a resident of Havenwood, with credible new information about the disappearance of her father, Frank Peterson. I said it was sensitive, and that I would only speak with her in person, somewhere public and safe. I hit send, my heart pounding. She replied in 20 minutes. Where and when? We agreed to meet the next day at a busy diner in a town 30 miles away. I spent the night on Ben's couch, sleep a distant possibility. The next morning, I walked into the diner and saw her immediately. She had the same sad eyes, but now they were sharp, intelligent, and wary. She looked like a woman who had been let down by the world too many times to offer trust easily. I sat down opposite her. Thank you for coming. I'll go anywhere for a real lead, she said, her voice professional, guarded. I've chased down 100 crackpots and conspiracy theories about my dad, so what do you have that's different? My name is Russell Miller. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the only crack in her stoic demeanor. Miller. The name of the man who replaced her father, the man who closed his case. You have a lot of nerve, she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. I know how this looks, I said, leaning forward, but you need to listen to me. Your father didn't run away. He was murdered. And I know who did it. She stared at me, her gaze intense, searching my face for any sign of deception. Who? My father, Sheriff Thomas Miller. I told her everything, the story I had never told another living soul, the hot summer night, the truck in the driveway, the shovel, the canvas bag, the old man oak. I told her about the robbery, the planted evidence, the ultimatum. I laid it all bare. When I finished, the diner's cheerful noise seemed to fade into the background. Sarah just sat there, her coffee untouched, her face pale. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent testament to 2 decades of unresolved grief. I always knew it, she whispered. In my gut, I knew someone had hurt him, but the sheriff himself, a man who came to my mother's house with a casserole and told us he was our friend. He's not a friend, I said. He's a monster hiding behind a badge, but he's a careful monster. We can't just go to the police. He is the police here. He'll bury it, and he'll bury us with it. A fire I hadn't seen before ignited in her eyes, replacing the sadness with a cold fury. The journalist took over. No, she said, her voice suddenly strong. No, we don't go to the local police. We go over his head. We go to the State Bureau of Investigation, and we don't go with a wild story from the son of the accused. We go with an anonymous tip so credible they can't ignore it. We force their hand. She was brilliant. We spent the next hour mapping it out. She told me about a man she knew, a retired state police detective named Henderson, who had always been a straight arrow. He'd privately expressed doubts to her years ago about the shoddy, rushed investigation into her father's disappearance. He would be our guide, our way of understanding the legal minefield we were about to cross. Sarah contacted Henderson. He agreed to meet, off the record. He was old school, grizzled, and sharp as a tack. We met in a dusty library conference room. Henderson listened to my story without interruption, his face unreadable. When I was done, he nodded slowly. I remember the Peterson case. It stunk then, and it stinks now. Miller closed it too fast, said the abandoned car was proof he'd hitched a ride out of state. Never made sense. He looked at me. The problem, son, is your testimony is tainted. You're the sheriff's kid, and he's currently trying to frame you for a felony. Any defense attorney would paint you as a bitter, vengeful liar. My heart sank. So what do? We make it so your testimony isn't needed. Not at first, Henderson said. We need physical evidence. We need to get the SBI to dig under that tree, but we need a plausible reason, a pretext. That's when Ben's part of the plan came into focus. What if the tree was dying? I asked. It's ancient. It wouldn't be suspicious for the property owner to get a quote on having it removed. A landscaping company would have legitimate reason to be on the property. Henderson's eyes lit up. And that company might use certain tools to assess the root structure. Ben, who had driven me to the meeting, spoke up for the first time. We have access to ground-penetrating radar. We use it for septic tank installations and finding old pipes. It can see anomalies in the soil. If there's a 20-year-old burial pit, it'll show up like a ghost on the screen. The plan was set. It was audacious, dangerous, and had 1,000 ways it could go wrong. The next day, Ben called my father's office, a classic business-as-usual call. He said he was Ben Dolan from Dolan's Landscaping, and that he'd heard the old oak on the Miller property might need to come down. He offered to come out and give a free estimate. My father, probably distracted and consumed by the Russell problem, agreed without a second thought. The idea of getting a free quote appealed to his frugal nature. Ben and I drove out there in his work truck. It was the first time I had been back to my childhood home since the arrest. Seeing the house, the long driveway, the imposing figure of the old man oak sent a shiver down my spine. My father met us outside, giving me a look of pure contempt. "What are you doing here?" he grunted. Ben needed a hand with the equipment, I said, my voice level. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, to stand in front of him and act normal. "He's helping me for the day," Ben added smoothly, all professional charm. "This GPR unit is a two-man job." My father watched us like a hawk as we worked around the base of the tree. Ben was brilliant. He talked about root rot and soil density, using all the right jargon. I focused on the screen of the GPR unit, my hands shaking slightly. We made a few passes, and then, there it was, a dark rectangular shape about 6 feet down, an area of disturbed earth that was colder, less dense than the soil around it. It was exactly where I remembered seeing him dig. Ben saved the scan data to a thumb drive. We packed up our gear, gave my father a verbal quote he would never accept, and left. He had no idea he had just supervised the discovery of his own crime. He saw me as a screw-up, a brainless grunt helping his successful friend. He couldn't have imagined I was the architect of his downfall. That night, we had everything we needed. The GPR scan, my testimony, and Sarah's righteous fury. The silent planning was over. It was time to make some noise. The first move in a war is often the quietest. Ours wasn't a gunshot, it was an email. Following Henderson's meticulous instructions, Sarah Peterson drafted the perfect anonymous tip. She sent it from a scrambled, untraceable email address to the public tip line of the State Bureau of Investigation. She also sent a blind copy to a trusted contact she had on the SBI's Internal Affairs desk, ensuring it wouldn't get lost in a general inbox. The tip was a work of art, a piece of plausible fiction designed to trigger an unavoidable institutional response. It didn't mention me. It didn't mention my father by name as a suspect. Instead, it claimed to be from the grandchild of a recently deceased Havenwood resident. The story was that their grandfather, on his deathbed, had confessed to witnessing something suspicious 20 years ago on the night Deputy Frank Peterson disappeared. He'd seen headlights on the Miller property, near the old oak tree, and what looked like someone burying a large, heavy object. Fear of the sheriff, the tip explained, had kept him silent all these years. The masterstroke was attaching the GPR scan data. The email explained that the grandfather, a former surveyor, had been so haunted by the memory that he had paid a local company under a false pretext to scan the area years later, confirming his fears. The data was presented as old, a historical artifact of a dead man's obsession. It was clean, it was compelling, and it gave the SBI a concrete scientific reason to investigate. It wasn't just a story, it was a treasure map where X marked the body. For 2 days there was nothing but a deafening silence. I was a wreck. I stayed at Ben's place, jumping every time the phone rang, barely eating. Every scenario of failure played out in my head. What if they ignored it? What if they just called my father and he managed to talk his way out of it? What if he somehow figured out it was me and came for me before the SBI could act? "It's a process, Russ," Ben kept telling me, trying to be the calm one. "These things take time. A state agency doesn't just roll up with sirens blazing based on one email. They're vetting it. They're looking at the old case files. They're building their own case." He was right. On the third day, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Russell, it's your father." His voice was different. The cold, authoritative baritone was gone. In its place was a strained, tight sound, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. "What do you want?" I asked. "I just got a call," he said, and I could hear him pacing. "From the State Bureau of Investigation. They're coming here, Russell. They're coming to my house with a search warrant." He paused, and I could practically feel the heat of his anger through the phone. "A search warrant for the yard. They're talking about digging. What did you do?" I had practiced this moment in my head 100 times. I had to be perfect. No anger, no satisfaction, just plausible deniability. "A search warrant. For what? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me," he roared, the control finally snapping. "This has your fingerprints all over it. The plea deal for the robbery is still on the table. You call this off, right now. You tell them you made it all up, that you were angry at me. You tell them it was a prank. I can make this go away for you, and I can make this SBI nonsense disappear, but you have to end it, now." It was breathtaking. The arrogance. The absolute certainty that he could still control me, still manipulate me with a mix of threats and false promises. He was admitting his guilt without admitting anything. He was panicked, and in his panic, he was showing his entire hand. He was terrified of them digging under that tree. "Dad," I said, my voice dripping with faux confusion and concern, "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. A search warrant. Digging. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you're the one who needs a lawyer." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from the electric thrill of a power shift, so profound it was seismic. For my entire life, he had been the one with all the cards. For the first time I had an ace, and he didn't even know what the game was. The news hit Havenwood like a shockwave. The SBI doesn't just show up in our sleepy town. The idea of the state investigating our sheriff was like hearing the Pope was being audited. Rumors started to fly. Ben, whose landscaping business made him a hub of town gossip, kept me updated. People were talking at the diner, at the post office, at the feed store. Was it about financial misconduct? An old case gone wrong? My father tried to control the narrative. He put out a statement through his office saying it was a procedural review related to a cold case, and that he was cooperating fully. He was trying to project calm, to maintain the illusion of control, but the cracks were showing. He looked haggard. People saw the strain in his face. The untouchable Sheriff Miller suddenly looked very, very human, and very, very worried. I stayed hidden away at Ben's, watching the drama unfold from a distance. Sarah called me every few hours. Her sources inside the SBI confirmed they were taking it seriously. The GPR scan was the linchpin. It gave them probable cause that was ironclad. They couldn't afford the political fallout of ignoring credible evidence of a murdered police officer, especially when a respected journalist was sniffing around the edges of the story. My father called me 3 more times. The first time he was threatening, the second time he was pleading, talking about family, about my mother's memory, about how this would destroy everything. He was trying to find the right key to unlock my obedience, not realizing that I had changed all the locks. The third time he just said my name, Russell, and then there was a long defeated silence before he hung up. He was trapped. He couldn't stop them from digging. He couldn't risk moving the evidence, because he'd have no way of knowing if they were already watching the property. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of fear and control, and now that very kingdom was shrinking, the walls closing in. He was the sheriff, the most powerful man in the county, and he was utterly powerless. He was being silently taken over by a ghost from 20 years ago, and by the screw-up son he had so catastrophically underestimated. The anticipation was a living thing, a coiled snake in my stomach. The day of the dig was coming, and with it, the truth. The day the SBI came to dig was gray and overcast, the sky the color of old dishwater. It was as if the weather itself was holding its breath. Ben and I drove to a spot on a ridge overlooking my father's property. We were far enough away to be inconspicuous, but with a pair of Ben's high-powered binoculars, we had a perfect view. A convoy of dark sedans and a white crime scene unit van rolled down the long gravel driveway. It was a procession I had never imagined seeing. State investigators, men and women in crisp jackets with SBI emblazoned on the back, poured out. They were calm, professional, and they moved with an authority that superseded my father's. And there he was, my father. He was standing on his own front porch, in his uniform, but he looked like a stranger in his own home. He was forced to stand there, a spectator at the exhumation of his own secret. His posture, usually so ramrod straight, was rigid with a tension that was almost visible. He was a king being forced to watch rebels tear down his castle walls. I focused the binoculars on the team gathering near the old man oak. They set up a perimeter with yellow tape. It looked so surreal, that bright, clinical plastic against the wild, ancient backdrop of the tree. They had the GPR data, so there was no searching. They knew exactly where to go. An investigator with a clipboard pointed to a specific spot at the base of the trunk. Two men with shovels began to dig. The first few scoops of dirt were dark and rich. Then the soil began to change color, becoming looser, more disturbed. Just as the GPR had predicted, I felt my own breath catch in my throat. This was it, the moment of truth. My memory, my secret, was about to become physical, tangible evidence. After about 20 minutes of digging, one of the shovels hit something with a dull, soft thud. The men stopped immediately. An investigator knelt at the edge of the hole, probing gently with a small trowel. He brushed away the dirt, revealing a patch of rotted, discolored canvas. Through the binoculars, I watched my father's reaction. He flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, a slight jerk of his shoulders, but it was a confession. He had just watched his carefully constructed world collapse into a 6-foot hole. The team worked with painstaking care, excavating around the canvas bag. It was large and heavy, just as I remembered. They lifted it from the earth and placed it on a white tarp. The power shift was absolute. These investigators, operating on a tip that I had initiated, were now in complete control. My father's authority had evaporated in his own backyard. The lead investigator took a knife and carefully slit open the rotted canvas. Even from my vantage point, I knew the moment they found what was inside. A collective stiffening went through the team. One of the younger investigators turned away, his hand over his mouth. They had found him. They had found Deputy Frank Peterson. Later, I would learn that his badge and service weapon were in the bag with his remains, a final, damning piece of evidence. Two investigators walked over to my father. They spoke to him for a moment, and then they turned him around and placed his hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was imaginary, but I heard it as clearly as a gunshot. Sheriff Thomas Miller, the pillar of the community, was being arrested on his own front porch for the murder of his deputy. The robbery charge against me vanished like smoke. It was officially dropped the next morning, a mere footnote in the seismic news that was rocking Havenwood. But my father, even from a jail cell, had one last desperate, venomous card to play. He wasn't going down without trying to drag me with him. Through his newly hired expensive lawyer, he released a statement to the press. It was a masterpiece of desperate counter-manipulation. The statement claimed that he was innocent. It claimed that the body in the yard was indeed Frank Peterson, but that he had not been the one to kill him. The killer, the statement alleged, was his deeply troubled, mentally unstable son, me. The story he spun was monstrously creative. He claimed that as a disturbed and jealous 12-year-old, I had been the one who'd had an altercation with Deputy Peterson, that I had, in a fit of adolescent rage, caused his death, and that he, my father, had made the terrible, heartbreaking decision to cover it up, to bury the body himself, all to protect his only son. The framing for the robbery, his lawyer argued, was not a malicious act, but a misguided, desperate attempt by a loving father to get his now adult spiraling son the help he so clearly needed by forcing him into the system. He was trying to turn my own weapon back on me. He was using the secret I had revealed to paint himself as a tragic, protective father and me as the monster. It was a Hail Mary pass, a desperate gamble to poison the jury pool and create reasonable doubt. For a terrifying moment, I felt a flicker of the old fear. He was so good at manipulating the truth, at crafting narratives. What if people believed him? What if this final insane lie was the one that stuck? He had lost his power, but he was still trying to burn my world to the ground on his way down. His last-ditch effort was a specter, a ghost story designed to haunt the investigation. But ghosts can't stand up to the bright light of day, and the sun was about to rise on his lies. His desperate counter-manipulation was met with a weapon he hadn't accounted for, the meticulous fact-checked and righteous fury of Sarah Peterson. While my father's lawyer was peddling his fiction to any news outlet that would listen, Sarah was publishing her life's work. Her article dropped the morning after his arrest. It wasn't just a breaking news story, it was a comprehensive indictment. It ran on the front page of the state's largest newspaper under the headline, "Havenwood's Hero, 20 Years of Lies." She laid out the entire history, starting with the intense professional rivalry between Sheriff Miller and her father. She had quotes from old-timers, former deputies, who now that my father's aura of invincibility was shattered, were willing to speak on background about his ambition and his jealousy of Frank Peterson's popularity. She detailed the motive with chilling clarity. Then she dismantled the original disappearance investigation. With retired Detective Henderson's guidance, she exposed every flaw, every ignored lid, every rushed conclusion. She revealed how my father had personally steered the investigation away from foul play and towards the walked-away theory, effectively investigating and absolving himself. The centerpiece of the article, however, was the careful, anonymous way she treated my story. She never named me. She referred only to a source close to the family who had been haunted by a childhood memory. She presented it not as an accusation, but as the catalyst that reopened the case. By protecting my identity, she shielded me from my father's slander and made his accusations look exactly like what they were, the desperate flailing of a guilty man. She controlled the narrative. She had the facts, the sources, and the moral high ground. My father just had a lie. The town of Havenwood, which had been reeling in confusion, now had a clear, credible story to believe. It wasn't the sheriff's convoluted tale of a secret teenage monster. It was Sarah's story of a hero betrayed and a town deceived. Public opinion, the very thing my father had cultivated and worshipped his entire life, turned on him like a rabid dog. The final confrontation wasn't in a courtroom or an interrogation room. It was just me, visiting him in the county jail a week later. I sat down in the plastic chair, picked up the receiver, and looked at him through the thick, scratched plexiglass. He looked small. The uniform was gone, replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit. The power, the authority, the arrogance, it had all been stripped away. All that was left was a bitter old man. "Why?" he asked, his voice raspy, defeated. "After all these years, Russell, why? I did it to protect you. I did all of it for this family." The lie was so ingrained in him he probably almost believed it himself. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, empty pity. "No, you didn't," I said, my voice calm and steady. The shaking was gone. The fear was gone. "You did it for yourself. You always have." I leaned closer to the glass. "You gave me an ultimatum, Dad. Confess to a crime I didn't commit, or you would bury me. You were going to destroy my life to solve your problem. You just forgot you'd already buried one man to solve another problem 20 years ago. You taught me that sometimes, to solve a problem, you have to be willing to dig. This is the lesson you taught me." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was searching for an angle, a way to manipulate, a word that could hurt me, but there was nothing left. I had taken away all his weapons. I was no longer his screw-up son. I was just a mirror, reflecting his own monstrosity back at him. I placed the receiver back in its cradle. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, though he couldn't hear me. I stood up and walked out of that jail. The heavy automatic door buzzed open and then slammed shut behind me. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I took a deep breath. The air didn't just feel different, it felt new. It was the first breath of the rest of my life. A life where I wasn't his son, his disappointment, or his problem. I was just Russell. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The new reality had begun. It's been 6 months since that day. My father's trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony from the SBI, the forensic evidence from the grave, and the mountain of circumstantial details Sarah had unearthed painted a picture so complete that the jury was out for less than 2 hours. He was convicted of first-degree murder. He will spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, a place where his name and his badge mean nothing. He finally managed to bury his problem, but the problem was, and always had been, himself. Havenwood is healing, slowly. The town is still grappling with the betrayal, the fact that the man they trusted to protect them was a killer hiding in plain sight. A new sheriff was elected, a younger woman who had been one of Frank Peterson's protégés. She's changing things, bringing back the idea of community policing he had championed. There's a new feeling in the air, a sense of a long festering wound finally being cleaned. Sarah Peterson and her mother have their closure, a painful and tragic justice, but justice nonetheless. There's a new headstone in the town cemetery now, one that reads Deputy Frank Peterson, a hero who never left. Sarah's article won a state-level award for investigative journalism. She dedicated it to him. As for me, my life has been quietly transformed. The owner of Miller's General, once he learned the truth, came to my apartment personally to apologize. He was mortified, he said, for being a pawn in my father's scheme. That apology meant more than he'll ever know. The cloud of being Russell, the screw-up, has finally dissipated. People in town look at me differently now, not with pity or suspicion, but with a quiet respect. I'm the man who unearthed the truth. Ben and I have gone into business together, properly this time. I used the money from my savings and a small personal loan, one I secured on my own merit, to buy into his company. We're now Dolan and Miller Excavation. It felt right, turning the act of digging, the very thing that represented my family's darkest secret, into something constructive. We dig foundations for new homes, clear land for parks, help people build their futures. There's a clean, honest feeling to it. I'm telling you all of this because I spent 20 years living in a cage that I didn't realize was unlocked. My father defined me, and I let him. I accepted his narrative that I was a failure, a disappointment, because it was easier than fighting back. I was so afraid of his power, of his anger, that I kept his darkest secret for him, and in doing so, I kept myself a prisoner. It's a strange thing to realize that the one piece of information you're most terrified of is actually the only thing that can set you free. He thought he was untouchable, that his secret was buried so deep it was part of the earth itself. But secrets are like seeds. You can bury them, but you can't always stop them from growing, and eventually they break through to the surface. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. I swear it wasn't. It was about not letting him bury me alive next to the man he'd already murdered. It was about survival. But when your own father looks you in the eye and gives you the choice between a lie that will cost you years of your life and a truth that will cost you the rest of it, the distinction gets blurry. When he decided to frame me, to sacrifice me for his own legacy, well, it wasn't about revenge, until it was. And I've come to realize that maybe that's okay. Maybe some injustices are so profound that the only moral response is to burn the whole rotten structure to the ground. He built his life on a grave. All I did was hand him the shovel. So I want to ask you all, what would you have done? Would you have taken the plea deal to keep the peace, to survive? Or would you have dug up the past, no matter the cost? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have a story about standing up to a power that seemed unbeatable, I want to hear it. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and please, subscribe to the channel for more stories. You never know when you'll need a reminder that even when things seem hopeless, you might just be holding the key to your own cage.